Yesterday, I posted a video about why Volcarona will most likely get banned from Gen 9 competitive singles, as quite some members of the OU Council are heavily leaning towards pro ban and they are voting on it today, so the announcement should be out anytime today. The gist of Volcarona being banworthy is that it has no reliable counterplay, as it can run many different tera typings with Tera Blast to break through would-be counters like Heatran, Clodsire and Skeledirge, and every tera type requires a different counter, making this Pokemon unpredictable and hard to reliably deal with. On that video I got some comments about counters to Volcarona, and there seems to be a misconception of what exactly a counter is and what is not. So what exactly is a counter in competitive Pokemon? A counter in competitive Pokemon is a Pokemon that can reliably switch into a certain threat and deal with it consistently over the course of a match. Since I talked about Volcarona just now, I will give an example of Gen 8 Volcarona. In Gen 8, Heatran was an amazing counter to Volcarona. Heatran could easily take fire hits because of Flash Fire and could tank coverage moves like Bug Psychic and even Giga Drain. Heatran could then beat it one-on-one with a combination of Magma Storm, Toxic and Taunt. This is a reliable counter to Volcarona and was very viable as well, and this set was used a lot anyway and not just to counter Volcarona. Since in Gen 9 I do not believe there to be a viable counter to this Pokemon, I will use Meowscarada as an example. Amoonguss is a viable, reliable counter to Meowscarada, as it cannot threaten it with a KO. It can use knockoff for massive damage, but after that the power drops down significantly and Amoonguss can threaten it back with Sludge Bomb. This is the essence of a counter. A Pokemon that can switch in and reliably take it out in a one-on-one scenario for the majority of the match. These Pokemon should also be viable in the meta already, as very niche Pokemon that are objectively bad are not used and players will rarely sacrifice a whole team slot for a bad Pokemon just to counter a Pokemon that they might run into, not to mention that if they don't encounter that Pokemon, it's just dead weight most of the time. Now I want to debunk some misconception about counters I saw mentioned in the comments on my Volcarona video. By the way, if I'm talking about your comment, please don't take it personally or as an insult or something. I'm not attacking you for anything, or like said, I'm just going to explain why it's not reliable. Please don't hate on these people in the comments. Everybody is here to learn at the end of the day. So the first comment is from Devin van Vuren, who I'm pretty sure is Dutch as well. Dus Devin, ik ga dit speciaal voor jou uitleggen. Devin talks about how Choice Band Cinderace, especially with Tera Fire and a Sun Boost, can reliably 2-hit KO Volcarona and it's faster as well. While this sounds nice in theory, it doesn't work that way in practice. If I sent out my Volcarona on your Meowscarada for example, you are forced to switch out, well I can go for a Quiver Dance. Now you send out your Cinderace, but the problem is I'm now faster, and as I mentioned in my Volcarona video, Tera Water and Ground are common Tera types of Volcarona. So what will happen is, I will just use Tera Water, outspeed, and one-hit KO Cinderace with Tera Blast Water. If Sun is up, it might be a 2-hit KO, but I resist Fireball anyway. Not to mention that Stealth Rock might be up and you've already taken damage and cannot switch in multiple times throughout the match. This also requires heavy setup, as you need to use Cinderace with the Choice Band, use your Tera as well, and Sun needs to be up, which means you need to be using a Sun team. Cinderace has also fallen a bit in usage recently with the infestation of Pokemon like Samazenta Hero and Urshifu. Next up is a comment from Quinton Miner about Assault Vest Tyranitar. Tyranitar is not a common Pokemon in the meta at all right now, so you're already forced to use a worse Pokemon objectively. Not to mention that Assault Vest is not a common item on Tyranitar, it rather runs leftovers or heavy-duty boots for longevity. While it is unlikely that offensive Volcarona will win a 1v1 against Assault Vest Tyranitar, it will be able to deal massive damage, and if it is defensive Volcarona, it can beat Tyranitar one-on-one with Will-O-Wisp. So in this case you would be forced to use a worse Pokemon with a specific item and use Tera if you want a shot at beating Volcarona, which is very restricting and still unreliable, so this is not a counter either. Next comment is from Daniel Smith, where he mentions that Cerulege, Special Defense Dozo, Skeledirge, Excalibur and Banded Dragapult can take care of it, and also mentions that Tera is the problem, which I do agree with. If you are ignoring Tera, then yes, these Pokemon can take it out. However, it's not the case in practice. With Tera Water, it can beat Cerulege and Skeledirge, Tera Grass can beat Dondozo, Tera Rock can beat Excalibur, and Will-O-Wisp can beat Banded Dragapult, so these are not reliable either. As I mentioned earlier, Volcarona can run multiple viable sets, and all of them require a different counter, and it shows. Last comment is from 7ch, hope I'm pronouncing that right, and it's about Tera Water Frostmoth being a counter to Volcarona. Frostmoth is objectively a very bad Pokemon, and is not really used at all in the Gen and overuse meta, so being forced to use it is already very restricting. Not to mention that Frostmoth cannot switch into Volcarona reliably, as it is 4 times weak to fire. It is mentioned that Frostmoth can switch in after a teammate has been KO'd, but being reliant on a teammate to die is not reliable counterplay at all. While I'm sure that Frostmoth could beat any set of Volcarona with Tera Water and Quiver Dance, it is dependent on Tera. So for this to work, you have to use a bad Pokemon, sacrifice a teammate and hope that Volcarona is not gonna use a setup fodder, and use your Tera to beat one Pokemon. That is very restricting and unreliable. Not to mention that I could just switch out my Volcarona and send out a counter of my own, and if Volcarona is not present, you basically have a wasted team slot in most cases. These are the comments that stood out to me on my latest video about Volcarona, and once again, this is not an attack or something like that, and don't hate all these people. Let me know your opinion about counters in Pokemon, and check out my video on why Volcarona will be banned from Gen and competitive singles, or why it already might be banned. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.